What are we whispering about?
I had three pet rats, and every morning I would just come down and check on them. Two were in a very large enclosure, and there was one who was very, very elderly, and he lived above them in a kind of downsized enclosure because his mobility was poor. But on this morning I looked in there, and the two rats were sleeping as normal, but there were two figures in there, two little figures stood, and they kind of had a mournful disposition. And I don't know, I had to sit down and just stare. I was just staring at them, and they were transfixing. Yeah, they were spellbinding.
In the air, by the sea, from the land, and within you and me. Fairies are whispering. Have you been coloured, confused, completely captivated, and craving clarity? This is Claire Casely, and I am a fairy whisperer.
Maybe you could use some clarity, some guidance.
To catch a whisper, you have to listen closely. Listen with me. Hello, welcome everyone. The haunting harp music you heard in the intro was Ondina, played by gifted harpist Elizabeth Jane Baldry from her album Harp of the Wild and Dreamlike Strain. Ondina means water spirit. Thank you to EJ for permission to use her beautiful music in the podcast. I'm delighted to say that EJ is one of my guests in the autumn lineup of Fairy Whispering. If you enjoy this episode, please follow and share with a friend. To contact the show, email me on clairefairywhisperer@gmail.com or via any of my podcast socials at Fairy Whispering Podcast. Here are some cool podcasts where you will discover more about real fairies and their folklore. Kate and Neil of Hare in the Hawthorn, Modern Fairy Sightings with Joe, Fascinating Fae with Jim, the Folklore Podcast with Mark Norman, which has several fairy episodes, and Chris and Simon of Boggart and Banshee. So now we're going to hear my interview with Paul, which is one of the most fascinating and intriguing interviews that I've had so far on the podcast. I'll come back to you at the end. In Claire Brings Clarity, I share a bit more about fairies, connection with death and funerals, and some Victorian artists that depicted fairy funerals as well.
How are you doing, Paul?
I'm doing fine, thank you, Claire. Thanks for having me.
What's it like where you are this evening?
It's quite humid. The grey skies are setting in. So it looks like rain. It's kind of in betweeny twilight, kind of in betweeny time. It's perfect. It's perfect, mate, to see the little fellas.
Which I'm really interested in hearing about. So, Paul, you contacted me, you emailed me about some interesting experiences that you've had with fairies, and also interested in something that you shared with me about your interest in magic. So, where would you like to start?
Yeah, I think we should start with the encounter because it was so unexpected and profound. In that, I had three pet rats, and every morning I would just come down and check on them. Two were in a very large enclosure, and there was one who was very, very elderly, and he lived above them in a kind of downsized enclosure because his mobility was poor. But on this morning, I looked in there, and the two rats were sleeping as normal, but there were two figures in there, two little figures stood, and they kind of had a mournful disposition, and I don't know, I had to sit down and just stare. I was just staring at them, and they were transfixing. Yeah, they were spellbinding.
Wow, and can you describe the figures?
They were just under a foot, just under a shoe size in height. Their clothing was... They struck me as being male and female. Their clothing was like muted colours, muted greys, green, brown, and I thought they had feet, but it looked more like clogs. Some kind of shoe wear, very basic shoe wear. They were like they had a kind of Eastern Europe. I don't know why. Maybe recollections from illustrations in old fairy stories, but they had kind of an Eastern European feel to them. And the clothing reminded me of something kind of wartime. There was kind of drab clothing, maybe prisoners of war would wear, which is strange because they also had the appearance of being quite toy-like, in that they looked like the toys that prisoners of war may have made. And the clothing also reminded, I don't know if you've seen that film Pan's Labyrinth, but the partisans in the wood, that kind of muted, quite dapper but muted camouflage clothing. Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting you say camouflage. Because from speaking to other people and my intuitive feelings about fairies and insights into fairies is that they will prefer to wear clothing that they can easily camouflage themselves against the background of wherever they are.
Sure.
So
I got the impression that they'd always been there, but for some reason that they'd made themselves known, and I only knew the reason, which was the following day when the old rat passed away. So I figured perhaps they'd come out in mourning.
had you ever sensed any sort of presence before in your house?
Not. I've always felt the house has been pretty clear. I've never felt anything. Definitely not on the other spectrum, like any kind of spirit or poltergeist or anything like that.
So what time in the morning was this, Paul, that you saw these figures?
I'd say sunrise.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, because I remember the quality of the light. And every morning I used to stick the radio onto Radio 3. And if it was piano music, they wouldn't move. But if the violin concerto came on, they would start dancing like a jig.
Oh, so you saw these figures more than once when you put the radio on?
I saw them all that day.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. But when I put the radio on, they would move.
So how did you feel when you saw these figures?
A bit spooked out, to be honest.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because the whole drama of it seemed really somber. Because I say dance, but it was more like a jig, like a Tyburn jig, as they used to call it, when they put people on the gallows.
I would not heard that.
Yeah, they call it the Tyburn jig.
Tyburn.
Sorry if that's a bit dark for people.
I've spoken to people about lots of different things on this show.
Okay. I think they were drawn to the violin, which makes sense if you think about if they're very old creatures who have followed humans for so long. The piano is relatively a new instrument compared to the violin.
Yes.
So the violin would be in their DNA, so to speak.
That's true. So people listening can understand the sequence of events. So can you just go through the sequence of events leading up to seeing these little beings? Because I'm just wondering what came first.
I walked into the room, looked into the enclosure, see that the rats were okay, then kind of back away to my normal morning seat. But whilst doing that, that's when I spotted them and had to sit down quickly. Then I'd be having a bit of cognitive dissonance, so I probably put the radio on. And then I'd see them moving. And then they didn't move all day.
Oh, they just stayed there?
They stayed in the enclosure all day. To the point where I just got on with whatever I was doing.
Were you seeing them psychically? So have you had experience of seeing spirits and fairies all your life? Or if somebody else came into the room, would they see them as well?
Well, that's a big question. I don't know. My grandmother's from the west of Ireland.
Yeah.
So I've grown up with stories all my life. So the door's always been open. And the way her Catholicism was, it was more of a kind of synchronistic religion that seems to have more in common with deep South American hoodoo in the way that she arranged little shrines and picked up little bits and pieces. And so I think they were happy to be there in my presence.
Did they just stay still all day in the enclosure, or did they move around, or?
They stayed still. It was as if they turned up. Well, you know when people turn up at a funeral and they wait at the door for the family to enter first?
Uh-huh.
That's the impression I got.
And when did you notice that they disappeared, or when did they actually vanish?
They were there when I retired for the evening, but the following day when I came down to repeat my routine, I noticed the eldest rat, Bluebell, had passed away that night and they'd vanished.
Oh, I see. I see. So they were there before your rat died, and then once your rat had passed on,
Yes.
they went to. Oh, that's very touching.
Yeah.
Did you try to communicate with them at all?
Well, when I realised that they were responding to music, I tried whistling and they responded to the whistle.
Did they look at you? Did you make eye contact with them?
They were focused, heads down. I'm sure they were hooded.
Okay. So could you see their facial features at all?
Not directly, but what they kind of reminded me of those in the 70s. A lot of old people used to have ceramic figures of an old man and a young man, and of knickknacks they would put on the fireplace. Do you know the ones I mean?
I know, yeah. I grew up.
You know the ones I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, that kind of thing. I got the feeling that they were there, but they were very keen to tell me that they were there on their own terms. Yeah, they weren't to be prodded, or they weren't to be a circus act. This was serious business.
Do you have a connection with fairies through your grandmother, do you think? I mean, did your grandmother talk about the fairies at all?
She had many tales from the old country.
Mm-hmm.
And she would just, I remember because she used to read the tea leaves. And I remember her saying to me one day, she said, you know, Paul, you can read the tea leaves as well. And I said, how do you know? And she said, because I'd been watching you in the garden and you were talking to a crow. So there was always this kind of language being used where nature and this kind of, we don't need WhatsApp. We can talk to crows.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's something we do as naturally as children, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Yeah. And it's so important to foster that in children, or let them have time to do that sort of thing, especially nowadays.
Yeah, it's so important.
Mm-hmm.
There's lots of little folky history things she would always do. If she'd had a wisdom tooth taken out, she would make sure she put it in a special place in the house. On the house, actually, on the outside. Must have been some kind of protective thing.
Oh, that's interesting.
And she would always buy pegs from any travellers who came around. Mm-hmm. Because she had probably been warned of some consequences of people who haven't bought pegs, you know?
Yes. Yeah, I mean, I remember in the market where I live, I live in a market town. Even when I was small, travelling people knocking on the door and selling heather.
Yes.
Mm.
Yeah.
But don't see them anymore. It's like a custom that's just vanished, isn't it? So this day, Paul, with the fairies there in your house all day, I mean, that's just such an amazing experience to have. Did you share it with anyone else?
You're the only person I've told.
I feel really privileged to hear this story.
I thought it might be worth getting out there and you know, in case there's the academic side of me wants to know more, you know?
Yes.
But
Yeah.
I'm happy for it to be what it is, but I thought if I put it out there, who knows?
I only ask questions on the podcast because I want people that are listening to have as clear and as vivid impression, I suppose, of your experience as possible. I mean, I'm really fascinated by it because I've not heard of a fairy experience that goes on for that, you know, like all day.
Yeah, it was crazy. It was one of those things, though. I think they don't stop time, you know. It's almost like abductee territory. They can manipulate time, or they operate in a different time. So it was a day, but it kind of felt like 5 minutes.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that, whether you noticed any sort of time dilation.
Yeah, totally. You could have been sat there for 12 hours and not got hungry or thirsty as well. So it's like a kind of suspension, animated suspension. And some of the stuff that's happened since then is just, I don't know, it's been brilliant. I know they were quite mournful and somber, but they've cured my insomnia.
Have they?
Yeah, and I've found my true flame.
Oh, wow.
So, yeah. And then all the stuff that goes missing in the house, like every hour of every day.
I'd love to hear about that. Sorry if I've asked this already.
All right.
So when the fairies went, how did they leave? How did they leave the space?
Well, because they were there all day, and I had to go to bed at some point. So I left them, and I can only assume that my theory is that they left at the exact point that the rat passed away, which was during the night.
Okay. Yeah. How did you feel about this? I mean, going to bed and these two little beings being in your sitting room still, did you say anything to them when you left the room, or?
Yeah, I'd been talking to them during the day. It had just become so commonplace. You know, I was probably saying to them things like, "Oh, I'll keep the music on for you because there's nothing on telly."
Yeah.
It became, yeah.
That's
It's only till a couple of days after that it sinks in.
Did they respond at all? Did they speak to you in any sort of language or telepathically?
If they were speaking, they were definitely speaking telepathically. They gave me the impression they were tolerating me whilst they were doing some kind of duty.
Yeah. I mean, I've heard this about fairies they have this very authoritative way about them, even though they might be quite small sizes, aren't they? But yeah, this aura of, this is our space, and they're just humouring you.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I'd never really thought about it, but I'd agree with that. And if you think that they're savvy with different astral spaces, more than we are, really, then they are going to have some kind of lordship over that space.
I'm interested in hearing about the objects disappearing, but also about what you know about the history of the land that your house is built on and the area as well.
Yeah, I'll tell you, because that ties in with the dream that I had not long after the encounter. So the house is built on marshland, old marshland, and there were Vikings here. You could feel them, and if you have a heavy enough astral dream, you can go back in time and see them. So one night, I was having this plumbing issue, which must have been playing on my mind because I think it was going to turn out to be quite expensive. So I was dreaming that I was underneath the house, looking at pipes. And it wasn't a kind of psychological Freudian dream, it was definitely astral dream because it's quite lucid. And I found this hidden passage under the house, followed the passage for quite a while. And it brought me out up into a working mill. And most of the mills around here have been repurposed or shut down. So the next day I looked up the nearest working mill, and it's just, I can see it from the window. And there was a site on the mill's website which I clicked on, which led me to this holy well, which turns out to be a Neolithic portal. So all this can come about just from worrying about some plumbing work.
That's amazing.
Yeah, at first I was excited. I thought I'll go to visit this Neolithic portal and this holy well. And then I read the folk tale that goes along with it, and I thought, no, I'll give that a miss.
Could you briefly sort of give us an outline of the story about the well?
From what I remember, it was a father and a daughter, and it was quite a stretch back in time where people weren't really allowed to go out of the houses for some reason. But the daughter persuades the father to take her along. I don't know what he's doing, gathering something or looking for something. And they stumble across this well. And the daughter becomes transfixed by the well. And the well ends up smothering and eating her up, and I don't think she returns. In fact, she's probably still in the well now.
Gosh, so she goes into a different dimension.
Yeah.
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 What was your sense of the well when you visited?
I didn't visit, but the funny thing is, I always remember when I had my Jack Russell dog, he never wanted to walk anywhere near that spot. And I couldn't understand it because it just looked like the rest of the landscape, really. But now I know.
How far is it from your house, Paul?
Probably walk it in 10, 15 minutes.
Okay, so do you feel that your dream is showing you that that well is in some way connected with what's going on in your house?
It's possible. It's possible that there are things unknown which allow certain manifestations to happen. It's one theory.
And I always like to ask people how they knew that what they were encountering was fairies. And there's no right or wrong answer to this. It's just what your sense was and how you came to that understanding.
I knew they were fairies of some sort because they were inhabiting a space that only fairies could inhabit. If if it was, say, a deity, I doubt they would preside in a humble pet's cage.
Yeah.
They'd probably be too full of themselves. or if it was a malevolent spirit, they'd want to really spook me out or destroy some crockery. But the space that these inhabited, it was a space of, it could only be their space. That's how I knew they were fairies. And then the preceding events of things disappearing,
Yes.
that was just another sign. It was like, well, we've done our duty and our hard work. Now, because you accepted us, we can have a bit of the old playful mischief.
Yeah.
It's just our way of having a little giggle now.
So what started to happen? I'm really interested in this.
It's just, well, you take your watch off, you put it on the table, and do the washing up. Come back. Where's my watch? Go back in the kitchen. No, it's not in the kitchen. Go back. It's on the table. It's like this is happening every hour. Every hour. It's like, and then if it's not a watch, it's a pen or a TV remote, or a phone, or it could be a sock, could be some flip-flops. I've just given up. You know, I stand there saying, all right, it's a good laugh, isn't it? You know, where's my key? I've got an appointment.
And do they give the objects back when you ask for them?
If you ask them, chances are they'll hold on to them for even longer.
Oh, okay.
You know, they're cheeky.
Yeah. Have you set any boundaries with them and said, look, I don't want you to be doing this anymore, and you've got your space, I've got mine?
I think that would be a bit mean.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I think it would be a bit mean because they're not really doing any harm. So infuriating as it is, I'll just let it go as a bit of entertainment for now.
Do you give anything to them?
I gave them a jar of black treacle, and I give them silver coins.
Do they take them?
I always make sure I put them down in like a row. Sometimes they move, but you never know if it's a magpie.
Silver coins is what people traditionally left at pixies here in the West Country. A bowl of water or a bowl of cream or some coins or honey is something else that people give. And it just then starts this kind of relationship with them, doesn't it? Where they're supposed to behave a bit more kindly or less mischievously.
It's a beautiful thing. And I think once you do start like knocking on doors, you'd be amazed at what can happen.
You sound like somebody that has had more than one unusual experience in your life.
Yeah.
Just talking to you, I get that sense.
Yeah. I spent some time in India, in the Punjab, with a guru.
Oh gosh, I'd love to hear about that.
Well, I saw some things that I have no words for. Really.
Could you share any of that with us? Because there are people listening to this show that won't have had some of the experiences that you've had, and I'm really interested as well.
Sure. Yeah, a long time ago, I was initiated into something called Surat Shabad Yoga, and the guru lived in the Punjab, so I travelled out there to sit with the guru for a long time. And you know, when you hear the word shape-shifting, it's real. So I remember being sat there one evening, and I'd say in human terms, the guru was about maybe 70-year-old, and like a flick of a switch, he looked about 98. And then with another flick of the switch, he looked about 21. And then another flick of the switch, he was back to the guru I was sat with. This kind of stuff happens all the time over there. It's such an old country.
That's amazing to see that in front of your eyes.
Mm.
I know that these are really ancient skills that we all have, but they have developed in themselves to the highest point, haven't they? So there's things like people can walk through walls or levitate.
People can walk through walls. I have seen people walk through walls.
Have you?
Yeah. The question is, though, if your aim is to get closer to God or the Godhead, how important is it to walk through a wall? But yeah, I've seen people walk through walls.
That's amazing. I suppose where we are in this part of the world, we've forgotten, haven't we, that all of us have those skills, and they're becoming those abilities because we only use a tiny amount of our brain, don't we?
Yeah, absolutely. And unfortunately, like the Western esoteric tradition, it puts a lot of people off exploring it because it's so kind of ritualized or academic, on you need this or you need that. Or it's the other way where it's too easy, it's too new age. So in the West, we've lost a lot of structure to something which could be really productive for a lot of people.
Yes. And how long were you in India?
About a year.
Wow, I bet that really changed your whole viewpoint on reality and consensus reality, anyway.
Put it this way, it was difficult to work in the call centre when I came home.
Imagine. Did it change your career path at all? Did you think, I can't do this anymore, I need to do something totally different or more aligned with where I am now?
I've had so many different jobs. I mean, I can read the cards, so I read the cards for many years. But yeah, me and the workplace can be quite problematic. I never feel a fit in anywhere, you know?
I totally get where you're coming from. I've totally felt the same way my whole life.
Yeah.
That's why a lot of people listening to this, because they've had experiences, will know or feel the same. I think there's a lot of us out there that are just don't fit into the consensus reality and structure.
No, and also I don't want to sound like like a grumpy old man, but I got on the bus the other day and every single person is staring at the screen. No one's looking out the window.
Mm-hmm.
One day there were two fox cubs playing with each other. No one saw it.
Oh.
And I just thought, this is a new reality.
Yeah, it is. It is if we're not careful. Because I've spoken about this before on the show, even screens are being given to young children as pacifiers now.
Yeah.
So from like almost as soon as a child can hold a tablet, they're in that reality, that virtual reality.
It's so sad. Like going back to my grandma and the kind of roots of being open to this kind of thing. Just going for a walk with my granddad, he always knew where the birds' nests were. He knew what the birds were called. He knew what the trees were called. There's kids these days, they can't name, they don't know the difference between a conker and an acorn. And it is sad.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it's really important for all of us to connect with nature. I mean, that's what we are, isn't it? We are nature. So
Yeah, I mean, I was thinking that it's quite. I know you're down in the West Country, and I'm up in the north of England. I think it was quite surprising to see fairies or pixies up here because, from what I can sense, might be wrong, but with the landscape being so rugged up here, we seem to tap into more like elemental spirits that are really, really, really grounded in the environment.
Have you encountered any of those, Paul?
Only through vague sensations of walking through woods and lying in bed and knowing there's probably Vikings underneath me, and that I just get the feeling that there's stuff in the landscape. So it's as wise to keep your eyes to the sky as it is to the undergrowth and the ferns where you expect the little people.
Yeah. I'd love to hear about your connection with magic.
Yeah, that's something that's kind of always been there. But since the encounter, it's just like taken off. Big time. And it's become like a really, really positive, creative element in my life. And it's a hodgepodge, I admit it, it's a hodgepodge of folk magic, ritual magic, and chaos magic. And it seems to be informing itself at the moment. It's telling me where to go and what's working. And one thing I know for sure, and that's only just from the last 3 months, is that magic works.
Yeah.
It works. It definitely works.
Yes, it does.
The only caveat to that is make sure you're aware of how it might work. You need to be very, very careful.
Is that the only fairy experience that you've had, Paul, or have you encountered them before, perhaps from childhood, or do you feel that you met them before?
I guess I must have, but I have no recollection. The fact that I took them with such kind of nonchalance suggests to me that I must have seen them before.
Yeah. I'm really interested in their complexions, whether you saw their eyes at all. Or...
Complexions were sallow, pale.
Yeah.
Almost ill.
Right.
Sickly. I got a feeling their eyes were just black.
Black, yeah. Like completely black, just blacked out.
Yeah.
Eyes, yeah. Yeah, the pixies I've seen and drawn have black eyes. That's the impression I get about them, and I've seen them in photos. Guest Jen, who's got a garden full of nature spirits. I seem to be good at being able to see fairies in photos.
Right. Do you think it's a good idea just to kind of snap away if you're feeling in that kind of frame of mind?
I think so, yeah. The ones that want to be seen will show themselves.
Do you think that those in my encounter, do you think that they were pixies or fairies?
It's really difficult when it comes down to different types because these are names that we've given them.
Yes.
And in the West Country, we've got the pixies, and then when you get to like Sussex, they call them the Pharisees. That's just all different. And then there's gnomes. I had this discussion with Kate Ray on Show She Calls Modern Fairy Sightings. We did an episode about pixies and gnomes and the differences.
Right.
She loves gnomes and I'm into pixies. But what you were describing with them being about a foot tall, did you say?
Yeah.
And the natural coloured clothing and the dark eyes. I mean, I'd say they sound pixie-like.
Mm.
And the one that I saw in a photo that Jen had, he was wearing like an old-fashioned type of hat that looked like it had a buckle on it. And he had sort of dark shoulder-length hair. And he had a coat on and a very pointy nose.
Mm-hmm.
Because he was in profile, so it's quite sort of more pointy than a human nose. No real sort of lips, just a very sort of straight sort of mouth, but they look mischievous. They always look mischievous.
Yeah. Do they have their own lifespan?
I don't really know, to be honest. That's something I don't know. I just know that they look after certain places, or they some of them are guardians of certain places, and some of them are just connected to the land for whatever reasons. They've always been there.
Right.
They've always been there, and those places are important to them. So I'm not sure about their lifespan. From old stories, the old stories say that, for example, with pixies, that they gradually wither away and fade away over time.
Right.
But I don't know how long that time is, because obviously their time is different to ours, because, like you were saying, we interface with them and it affects our perception of time.
I've got a feeling they'll come back.
Yeah, would you like to see them again?
Yeah. Yeah, I really would. It's strange how you can get such affection for something that's so strange and out of the blue like that.
Yeah, I understand that. I understand that with other people I've spoken to, that, all right, they're tricksy, but if they're fairly benevolent in other ways, and there's just this fascination with them, isn't there? And I think I want to see them more. I want to know more about them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, I think they can. I think they can sense human loneliness.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh,
So I was very, very lonely when they turned up.
Oh.
Yeah. And since they turned up, I haven't felt lonely.
So you said that this meeting with them has changed your life in a positive way.
Yeah.
It's been like a crossroads.
Yeah, totally.
And you found a relationship through this.
Yeah, I found my true flame who I thought I'd lost.
How long after you had this encounter did you meet your true flame? Oh.
Probably within a couple of weeks.
Wow.
Plus, I'd had insomnia, chronic insomnia for 20 years. And ever since the encounter, I slept like Puck in Midsummer Night's Dream or whatever.
That's wonderful. So their visit came with some positive gifts.
Yeah.
Yeah. I love that. I love that because fairies do bring gifts to us. Yeah.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
Yeah, and I think if they see you as an ally, then that relationship continues.
I think they know that you're grateful, and that's probably why they're playing tricks, because they're just letting you know they're still around.
I agree with you. It's a way of letting you know. Yeah, it's like their call sign, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I know that there are benevolent types of fairy that people have encountered, but on the whole, the ones that take things and bring them back, or the sort of things that you're experiencing, it's more to say, yep, we're still here, still around.
Yeah. Yeah, it's great. And it's helped me a lot, just generally. I've always been aware of animals, and But now I'm noticing a lot more, and I'm noticing little signs or omens. You know, if I come across a dead rat, I will know it's an omen or some sort, or a dead stoat, or a dead frog on the road. I've got my antenna up.
Yes, that's great. I know what you mean, and then so you have your own symbology with that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, you start operating in their language.
Oh, do you know, I love that. I love the way you've put that. Yes, you do.
Yeah.
One of the things that I see that, I know that fairies around are crosses. So crossed sticks
Oh.
on the ground.
Oh.
I'll go into a woodland and within a couple of minutes, or a place I've never been to in nature, and I'll see some crossed sticks, and for me that's we're here, welcome to our space. It's like a hello.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What I found as well is, since that encounter, I mean, it might not have anything to do with it, but it's let's say I need something. Let's say I need I need a new kettle, or I need a new chair. More or less, as soon as I've said it, the first charity shop I walk into, the exact perfect chair is just there. And it's just happening all the time now. Everything I need is just being given to me.
Oh my God. Yeah. I totally get that. Yeah, that's wonderful. So they're providing for you.
Yeah.
Yeah. One thing I've always say to myself, it's like a mantra, is that everything is always working out for me. Everything's going to be okay, and it always is. Everything
Yeah. Yeah.
okay, especially since I've had this connection with nature and the fae.
Yeah.
No matter how difficult things get, and life can be challenging, can't it?
Oh, yeah.
No matter how hard things get, there's always something that comes from them. Like a friend will send a Facebook post or something that says something about fairies or a fairy place.
Yeah.
Or a friend will send me a book, like a fairy book, or text message that cheers me up, or
Sure.
yeah, all those. So
There's sense. But they can see the hidden lines of hurt in our faces. They know.
Yeah, that's beautiful. It's been so wonderful speaking with you, Paul. Is there anything else that you'd like to
No, I think we covered everything, didn't we? No, that's been wonderful.
Yeah, it's been wonderful. Thank you for sharing your very precious experience with me and with my listeners. And if anyone's listening to this and has had a similar experience to Paul, or can give any more insight into his experience, then please drop a line to the podcast, clairefairywhisperer @gmail.com. I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Thank you, Claire.
Yeah, thank you, and take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you to my guest Paul for sharing his experience with us. Please email the show, clairefairywhisperer @gmail.com, if you have any insights about Paul's experience, or an experience with fairies of your own you'd like to share on the show. In episode 11 of the podcast, I spoke with Tyler, who had a near-death experience in which he encountered fairies. It's an inspiring episode that's really worth a listen. In Claire Brings Clarity, I'm sharing more about fairies and their connection with death. What are you wondering about? Claire brings clarity.
Claire brings clarity.
Fairies appear to be deeply concerned with human mortality. Walter Evans Wentz, in his Fairy Faith in Celtic Countries from 1911, noted how the association between fairy and death is found across the Celtic nations. Importance of death include dreams, bodily sensations, images on water, death candles, and death coaches. In the late 17th century, in his Secret Commonwealth, Reverend Robert Kirk confirmed that fairies notify us of dismal and tragic events through their dumb shows of funeral processions. He also points out that fairy kind are not immortal and that they also have their own funerals. This information is taken from John Cruise's article Predicting the Future Fairy Phantom Funerals, which is in the Lammas edition of Pagan Dawn magazine. Cruise notes that fairies will often communicate with us their knowledge of fatal events soon to take place. This is almost always done by some symbolic and indirect means, rather than simply telling us. In England and Wales, fairies will stage a mock funeral as a sign. Conversely, they will know of good fortune coming too, such as foretelling love for humans. This relates to my guest's experience of loss and then finding a beloved partner. Fairy funerals have been reported by various people in folklore. A fairy funeral was reported by the poet and artist William Blake at Felpham, Sussex, sometime between 1800 and 1803. Whilst walking in his garden, William noticed that there was a great stillness among the branches and flowers, and more than a common sweetness in the air. I heard a low, pleasant sound, and I know not whence it came. At last I saw the broad leaf of a flower move, and underneath I saw a procession of creatures of the size and colour of green and grey grasshoppers, bearing a body laid out in a rose leaf, which they buried with songs and then disappeared. It was a fairy's funeral. Funeral corteges have also been witnessed in Perthshire, Scotland, as recorded by Professor Catherine Briggs, and at the Church of St Uni in Lelant in Cornwall, as recorded by Robert Hunt in his Popular Romances of the West of England. A fisherman called Richard witnesses the funeral of a beautiful fairy queen in the church. There are some Victorian fairy artists that are worth mentioning for their beautiful portrayals of fairy funerals. John Anster Fitzgerald painted fairy scenes that included birds and mice. Two of his paintings depict a fairy death and a fairy funeral. The mournful disposition of the attendant fairies in these paintings is eerily like my guest's description of the fairies who are attending to Bluebell, his pet rat. Frederick Goodall created a beautiful painting of two fairies and a mouse, who appeared to be spellbound by one another. Some fairies are known to be kind to animals. and it appeared that Paul's rat, Bluebell, was favoured by them. Perhaps they entered Paul's home via the ancient well, or perhaps, as Paul sensed, they had always been there.